Early Germanic culture was rural. They lived in small to mid-sized villages and revolved around the rearing of animals such as goats and cattle, with only a few expanding into the farming of grain. Before the 3rd century, all of the Germanic peoples lived a harsh life. There was little excess of anything and they had to live day to day with no material wealth. Villages were spread across northern Central Europe and Scandinavia. However, none of these villages would have had more than 200 people living in them, with many slaves and clans living within. They lived in long houses made from wood, clay or turf, with the roofs stretching to the floor because of the snow. These houses could have also acted as a barn for animals during the night time, but the day-to-day activities of the family would have also taken place in here. All of the houses were long, but some longer than others. The length of one's house would have been the greatest way to show your power and wealth. However, calling these things houses would be a stretch. They were not built well, and Tacitus stated that they didn't even make use of stones or wall tiles. For all purposes they employ wrought hewn timber. Ugly and unattractive looking. And it is true that other tribes around the time, even their neighbours the Celts, built houses that have lasted even to this day. However, according to Caesar, this was because many of the tribes were nomadic and only had simple and temporary houses to protect from the weather. He also suggested that the buildings could have been purposely very simple to avoid getting raided by other Germanic tribes. The population of these villages would have grew over time with the rearing of animals, mainly cattle. They would have eaten grain with vegetables, with a focus on dairy, with meat being more of a treat, being eaten about once a week. However, the Germans made up of this lack of farming with the brewing of beer. The Romans viewed the Germans as a bunch of drunkards. However, to the Germans, the drinking of beer, hosting of beer, and to be able to hold one's beer was a sign of manliness. Germanic culture helped beer become a commonly drunk item and a communal activity over other drinks such as Latin wine. This culture spread can be easily seen today by those areas where the pub or tavern is still the heart of their communities, or by the more obvious celebration of Oktoberfest. The Germans also placed a huge emphasis on feasting and the entertainment of guests. It was even viewed as a sin to turn away a guest from your door. This was not uncommon for the ancient world, but the Germans mixed this much more with the drinking of beer. Men would hash out arguments loudly while drunk in taverns, before calmly coming to a conclusion once they'd sobered up. Tacitus stated that the Germans were not cunning or sophisticated enough to refrain from blundering out their innermost thoughts in the freedom of festive surroundings. This is just another way of saying that they were unreframed and very down to earth. This mentality was quite different to the Latin and Greek one, where socialization was surrounded in etiquette, politics and skullduggery. The Germanic tribes viewed themselves as pure and as a group of themselves. They weren't fond of breeding with foreign people or even mixing with them in the early days. This was very different to the Latins and Celts, who were much more multiracial, although not as much as modern activists like to suggest. Tacitus claimed that although kingship was passed down through bloodlines, it was the various war leaders that held the real power. However, these war leaders only remained in power if they kept winning great victories for their tribe, which led to a high-performing military meritocracy that made the Germanic peoples deadly and competent fighters. Additionally, each village or area had the concept of the 100. These 100 made up a special army that could be mobilized in an instant and brought with it much social clout. To be one of the 100 meant you were one of the best fighters. This again shows how meritocratic this society was, as it was your duty to the village to defend it. Moreover, the chiefs or king's personal bodyguards were expected to die alongside them. If the chief fell in battle, his bodyguards would also fight to the death. The chief himself was expected to fight in battle, and it was seen as a disgrace to be surpassed in courage by their followers. Therefore, the chief had to keep pushing himself to be better than his troops. The chief fought for victory, while his followers fought for their chief. The Germanic tribes used to war against one another and raid each other constantly. Although never unified, they did form various sizes of federations. This political landscape was ever-changing and has therefore been lost to history. But what we do know is that the rise and fall of these federations led to a militant Germanic culture. War and raiding was seen as a necessity for survival.
with the looting of food, women, slaves, and weapons commonplace. However, over time it also warped into a way of gaining power and prestige. The punishment for crime was severe and often resulted in death. Some punishments were meant to be seen by the tribe as a warning. These criminals were hung from trees on full display, traitors and deserters. However, some crimes were punished out of sight as not to spread the ideas or to hide the shame. These criminals were plunged into the marshes with something strapped to their heads. Such crimes were cowardice, being a poor fighter, dastards, and sodomy or unnatural practices. Be sure to check out my other channel, History Sticks, for the complete, longer, and comprehensive video.